Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. My name is Tara Moran. I'm a librarian at the Mastic Mauritius Shirley Community Library. Thank you for joining us for our library's monthly program from the National Park Service. Tonight's program is all about piping plovers, presented by Park Ranger Pat Riley. If you have any questions throughout this program, please enter them in your chat box. We will also have time at the end to ask questions, but if something pops up during the presentation, I'll be sure to ask Ranger Pat for you. So Pat, if you're ready, please tell us all about piping plovers.
Okay, I will put my screen up. Let's make sure we can do this. Okay, can we see my slide?
Yes.
Okay, good. So this is the time of year when the piping plovers come back to Fire Island to breed. So it's a pretty exciting time of year for us because these birds are really special. We're going to talk a little bit about what makes them special, about their life cycle, where they live, and where you can come and see them. So starting about the middle of March, so we're pretty close to it, you might start seeing signs that look like this on our beaches. So if you drive over the bridge to Smith Point Beach, our wilderness is to the right or to the west. And in that area, at this time of year, we're getting ready for the arrival of the plovers. And so we put up this string. If you see in the picture, the string with the little orange ties on it and the sign, we call this symbolic fencing. It's not fencing that would keep anybody out, because it's just a piece of string, but it shows us the areas where we expect the plovers to make their nests. They're very unusual birds that they like to nest right on the open beach. And we want to protect them. We're going to talk about why we need to protect them, but I hope everybody will understand at the end of the program why we want to respect these symbolic fences. So you might also see, and I'll show you pictures a little bit later, circles of wire mesh. And we put these around the nests, and some people call them enclosures, but we call them exclosures because we're closing things out. So the mesh is big enough for the plovers to run through it, but it's too small for a fox or a seagull to get in to eat the eggs or the chicks. So this helps to protect them when they arrive. Now, where are they arriving from? Let me see how I can get this. Go to the next slide. Okay. So if you look at the colors on this map, the pink shows the breeding areas. So Long Island is up there. You can see it on the right-hand side, up in the Northeast. All this pink areas show where they nest and raise their young. The blue areas, and it doesn't go all the way south, but it shows where they spend their winters. So the winter range is from coastal South Carolina and North Carolina, around Florida, the Gulf Coast. It also goes to the Caribbean islands of Barbados, Cuba, and the Bahamas. So this is where they spend their winters. Down in the warmer areas, they don't go all the way to the equator. They stay pretty close. So this would be where we would expect to find them in the winter, in these blue areas and further south to the Caribbean. So threatened versus endangered. These two terms are sometimes used interchangeably. The piping plover first received protection under the Endangered Species Act in 1985. So piping plovers nesting in the Great Lakes are considered endangered. the piping plovers along our coast are considered threatened. So endangered by definition is that the danger of extinction is real and present danger, while a threatened species is one likely to become endangered. So it's a little confusing with piping plovers. They are threatened in the federal law, but they're endangered in New York State, and they're endangered in several states. So there's a picture of a plover and a chick. We're going to see lots of these cute pictures. So here's a plover nest. Doesn't look like your typical bird's nest that you see. It really is just an impression in the sand. So they're really tough to spot. The birds, if you look back at this picture, are the same color, pretty close to the color of the sand. So when they're sitting on the nest, they're nearly invisible. So some history of piping plovers before we get into the life cycle and where you can go find them. They were common along the Atlantic coast. Now, when we say common, I'm not sure what the numbers were exactly, but they nearly disappeared due to hunting for the millinery trade. So millinery, if you're not familiar with the word, has to do with ladies' hats. So birds were hunted to decorate hats. So in the 1880s, it's estimated that 5 million birds were killed every year to make ladies' hats. So if you look at the photos here, these are just, off of the internet. They have entire stuffed birds attached to these hats. So by the late 1890s, women conservationists, so these were sort of working behind the scenes, rallied to protect the birds. Some women who saw this happening actually spurred Congress to pass the Migratory Bird Treaty Act in 1918. So if the 1860s to 1890s, they were killing a lot of these birds to make hats, by 1918, the Migratory Bird Treaty Act made it unlawful to pursue, hunt, take, capture, kill, possess, sell, purchase, barter, import, export, or transport any migratory bird. So just so you know, this law is still in effect today. So if you think about it, you're not supposed to possess any migratory bird or parts thereof. No one is going to come look in your beach bag and see if you picked up a seagull feather. But by the letter of the law, you're supposed to leave them where they are. And it all dates back to this 1918 law. So following the passage of this treaty act, numbers of piping plovers did recover to a peak in about 1940 or during the 1940s. And so this happened to be before beach recreation became really popular. So the current population decline is attributed to increased development and recreational use of beaches. So recent surveys believe there are about 800 breeding pairs, 200 of which nest in New York. So it's not just on Fire Island, but around the coastlines of New York State. So 200 pairs of birds is not a lot. And we might expect to find 40 or 50 pairs on Fire Island. It's not a lot of birds, which is what makes them special. So the piping plover became a protected species under the Endangered Species Act in 1986. So along the Atlantic coast, it's designated as threatened, meaning that the population would continue to decline if they were not protected. And this sort of outlines the meat of the Endangered Species Act. It provides penalties for taking, harassing, or harming the piping plover and affords some protection to its habitat. So in New York State, it's considered endangered. Other states where it's endangered are Maine, New Hampshire, New Jersey, Maryland, Indiana, Michigan, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Iowa, Ohio, and Pennsylvania. So we see our eastern coastal states, but also the Great Lakes. So it's hard to imagine. It's really, to me, very interesting that we see them on our Atlantic coast beaches, but they're also on the beaches of the Great Lakes. And they're endangered in every state that touches water where they might nest. And this Endangered Species Act provides very, very serious penalties for harassing piping plovers, which is why we're going to start on March 15th. We don't allow dogs on Fire Island beaches anymore. And that's because even if your dog is the kindest, sweetest, smallest dog, the piping plovers might see it as a predator, and that's a threat. And this would be considered harassment. Another thing that we restrict in the summer, which is kind of interesting, is kite flying. Now, just think about that for a minute. When a kite is on the end of its string, oh yes, there's a kite in the air, it looks nothing like a bird, but just think about the shadow on the ground. So the shadow on the ground appears to a nesting bird as a predator. So we do our best on Fire Island beaches to protect them. And why? Here's the question. Why do we care? People might say, oh, I see hundreds of piping plovers on the beach. People see other types of shorebirds, and it's usually not piping plovers, but they're considered a bioindicator that allows scientists to understand the condition of the entire ecosystem. So because of their sensitivity to outside influence, the presence or absence of piping plovers tells scientists whether the ecosystem is in good shape or not. And it has it indicates a lot of environmental factors like pollution, salinity, temperature, and food availability for the birds. So here's a piping plover on the beach. They are the first shorebirds that nest on Fire Island that arrive. They've been spotted already as of the day before yesterday. 4 of them were seen, I want to say, down by the Fire Island Inlet. I haven't seen any on Fire Island near us yet, but I also haven't, it was a really rainy day today. I didn't spend much time on the beach. So they arrive on their breeding grounds between now and sort of mid-May, and they stay 3 to 4 months. So this is a really, to identify a piping plover, notice the color, first of all. Now, there's sandpipers and sanderlings on the beach that are also gray and white, but the plover has a very short beak. If you look at that beak, it's yellow with a black tip. They have a black line across their forehead and a ring around their neck that doesn't go totally around. And if you notice, this bird is tagged. So scientists and researchers are on our beaches from the day that the first plovers hatch to tag them. And they're studying the population in this way. They actually catch them in something like a butterfly net and apply the tags. And the legs of the chicks are not a lot smaller than the legs of the adults. So they're able to attach a tag around the leg, and the numbers are significant. Also the color, which leg it's attached to, and whether it's above or below their elbow. So it's kind of interesting the way they keep track of all these plovers with these tiny tags that can be actually read from quite a distance. So that's pretty cool. So their nest, we call it a scrape. It's very shallow. They're made during courtship. Sometimes the birds line them with pebbles or shells. The nest that I showed you earlier was just sand with no shells added. And they usually are well above the high tide line. So they like the upper beach, not in the dune, but near the dune. Last year, we did have a few nests washed away by storms. They were above the high tide line when they were built, but then there was probably a nor'easter that that knocked out some of those nests, unfortunately. And here's a nest. This is probably about as high as you might see a nest in a little beach grass. But those eggs are so well camouflaged. And when the birds are sitting on them, they're nearly invisible. They lay 3 to 4 eggs. The eggs, as you see, blend in really well. And here's a plover incubating eggs. So you can barely see that nest. It's incubating its eggs, and males and females both take turns incubating the eggs. Incubation begins with the laying of the 4th egg. So after egg number 4 is when one of the parents will start to keep these chicks warm. They don't incubate them after 1 or 2 eggs. And it's interesting, if you know anything about poultry, chickens kind of do the same thing. They save up enough eggs until they have a clutch that will all hatch at the same time. So the eggs are on the beach, but they don't begin to develop until one of the parents starts to sit and incubate them. It takes 25 to 31 days for these eggs to develop. And the parents incubate them, keep them warm. But I was at some kind of a science fair, and I learned that they protect them from the sun as well. And if you think about that for a minute, it makes sense. Out on the open beach in, let's call it May or June or July, those eggs could cook if they were sitting there in the sun. So not only do they keep the eggs warm, especially at night, they shade them from the sun. So there's a couple of chicks, and the plover chicks are what's called precocial. So it's like the word we use, precocious, for a child who maybe has talents at a very young age or learns to read or speak really young. Precocial means they can feed themselves as soon as they hatch. Baby birds like robins, think of a robin in the spring, are born naked and helpless. They don't have feathers yet. More like chicks or ducklings, which also hatch fully feathered and ready to eat. So they will leave the nest right away to start to find food. Now they will stick with their parents for protection, and they'll probably sit underneath one of their parents all night. But for 28 to 35 days, the chicks grow and feed before they can actually fly, and we consider them fledglings. Interesting to note that studies have been done, and on beaches where there's a lot of people walking back and forth with their beach blankets and so on, it takes longer for the chicks to fledge. It can take an extra week because they need to go to the water's edge to feed. So even though the nest is up near the dune on the upper beach, the food is still at the water's edge. So the parents, you might spot them. The chicks are really tough. And when we get in the springtime, when the chicks are hatched, can you spot the chick in this picture? Takes a minute. But they need to get to the water's edge to feed. So they run across a totally open beach. This chick is sort of in between the shells, so it's pretty close to the edge of the water. But they need to go to the edge of the water to feed. So there's a better view. We can see it. It's stepped up on top of a shell. You can see that it's already been banded. And depending on the day they hatch, we may have chicks like this, flightless chicks, from mid-May until the end of August. So during that time, the rangers have to be really careful. We don't allow vehicles on the beach. And as of last year, it was kind of interesting. Our rangers could ride Polaris vehicles, those sort of UTVs, but they had to have a second person in the vehicle to spot plover chicks because they're so hard to see. So here's an adult plover at the water's edge, and they eat marine worms, They will eat fly larvae, insects, crustaceans, mollusks would be like a small clam, and other small invertebrates. So they're down at the edge of the water, pecking in the sand, the wet sand at the water's edge, looking for their food. This photo shows, and it's a little tough to see. If you see the plover behind the stick, they demonstrate a broken wing display if they're disturbed. So they're trying to lure a potential predator away from their nest. So they will pretend to have a broken wing and they'll sort of go along the sand. If you ever see a plover doing this, back up because you're too close. You must be so close to the nest that they're trying to lure you away. And I have a short video I'll show you later that actually shows this broken wing display. Oh, no, this is a video. So whoever took this video was far too close to this bird, but that's what they do if you approach their nest. So here's one of the exclosures I mentioned earlier. So here's our staff. They can install one of these exclosures in under 10 minutes. So they take a team, they'll dig a circle around the nest. I can imagine that the parent birds are very upset at this, and it could have been while they were installing an exclosure that they filmed that broken wing display. But they try to do it as quickly as they can, and it's buried underground under a few inches of sand to prevent predators from digging underneath. So we're protecting them from things that we would find on Fire Island, which would be fox and raccoons. But there's also netting over the top, which keeps out any other predators. And here's an interesting photo. If you just look at that picture for just a minute, and there's a couple of things going on here. So there's the exclosure. It's tough to spot the nest inside that fence. But if you look over to the lower left, you'll see the adult plover. And sitting on top of that exclosure is an osprey. And I don't think he was trying to get at those chicks because he's actually got a fish. So here's a little close up from that photo. So there's the plover over there on the left. That's an adult. And that osprey has a fish. This is an example of the signs we put up. And humans walking on the beach, even just going for a walk, can disturb their feeding activities. As I said, the dogs they see as predators. The kite, the shadow of the kite, they may see as a predator. So if you're at the beach, please respect the signs. Don't put your blanket and umbrella right up next to this string. We're trying to protect the birds in their nest. So here's a great example of size. So there's just a piece of marine debris, which happens to be a baseball. So plovers are tiny. They're usually solitary, maybe one or two together. They are not the birds we see in big flocks at the edge of the water. Those would be probably sanderlings. A plover is much paler in color. It's sort of short and fat and very well camouflaged. And you can sort of get an idea of the size with the baseball there. Something popped up on my screen. There we go. So sometimes, and this is my experience, I will hear the plover before I see it. So, okay, here's a very nice picture, but I'm going to play the sound. And if you find yourself on the Fire Island beach in the next few weeks, listen for this. So this is where we get their name, piping plover, from, is that piping, that tweet, 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 tweet sounds like, anyway, someone thought that was a piping sound, but it is very distinctive when you're on the beach. So I'd be very curious to know from a show of hands or in the chat box if you can let Tara know. Have you ever seen a plover on the beach? I don't know if anybody's popping those answers in.
Not yet, but I haven't seen them.
No? Okay. And just, I mean, the photos that I've chosen are some of the best photos we have. And you can see how well camouflaged they are. Oh, so I've got somebody in the chat says. No.
Yes.
Okay.
That's no.
And you can see how well they blend in. Here's one right at the water's edge. It's really tough to see. But by mid-August, they're pretty much done. Here's one of the reasons why we don't allow driving. You can see that's an adult. I don't see a chick in this photo, but I would guess the chick is down in the tire track, totally hidden. But they're going to fly south for the winter toward the end of August. So we lift our dog and kite restrictions on Labor Day. So here's a short video from one of our park biologists. She's since moved to a different park, but she's going to tell us a little bit about plovers.
I'm a wildlife biologist at Fire Island National Seashore, and I monitor and protect piping plovers on Fire Island beaches. So piping plovers, they're a federally threatened species, so they're covered under the Endangered Species Act. We really care about preserving this species for future generations, so that's why we take a lot of actions to protect their nesting areas. We monitor them to see how well they're doing, and we ultimately know then the success at our beaches for piping plovers. Plovers, they're a small sand-colored, kind of stocky shorebird. Adults have an orange beak with a black tip, and they have a black crown on their head and also a black band on their neck. They like to nest in sort of upper beach habitat. They fly in, establish territories in these areas, hoping to find a mate, and then
I'm just going to pause this for 1 second to make sure you all see the adult piping plover, sort of where the gravel changes to sand, and there are two chicks running around in the grass. They're really tough to see. This video makes you understand what it's like to really try to go observe them.
Hopefully once after that, they do courtship, and we find their nests in those areas. We locate their nests by following and watching their behaviors, and we look for what's called scrapes, which are soft depressions in the sand itself that they actually lay their eggs right onto the sand in what we call a nest bowl. And once they've laid their last egg, usually 4, they hatch about 27 days after they've laid that last egg. So when we find nests, we want to have a good estimated hatch date, just so we know when to do nest checks to look for hatching, but also because we, in some areas where we have a lot of predators, we like to put a predator exclosure around the nest. This predator exclosure helps from animals digging in or flying into and predating the nest before it hatches. And so these are important in basically ensuring hatching success for these nests. One behavior that plovers exhibit is called called a broken wing display, and this is pretty specific to this species. So if you're in an area and you see a bird pretty much vocalizing really loudly and pretending to have an injured wing, you want to back up immediately, very slowly, and inform someone, because you probably just stumbled across a plover nest. They do this to attract your attention away from their nest, so they're trying to lure you, since they perceive you as a predator. Piping plovers are important for biological diversity at sites, and they're really an integral part of the coastal environment. So because of that, we like to balance their survival and their protection with recreation on beaches that happens every spring and summer.
So that's pretty much that's all the slides I have. If anybody wants to see the video again, I'm happy to play it. But I'd love to hear any questions you have. And then I'm going to invite everybody to come out and see plovers.
Well, that's great. Well, while people are pulling their questions together, I do have a couple of questions about the tagging and the research and recording of them that you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
Have you seen that the plovers are increasing in number, and how quickly do you think you'd see that happen?
That's a tough question. I've been with the park 9 years now. And in those years, the last 2 years, we've had more plovers than we have had in a long time. Last year on all of Fire Island's beaches, 70 chicks fledged. Now that was kind of a record for us. There were lots of nests. It has to do with the availability of habitat. So after Hurricane Sandy, believe it or not, it improved the habitat for plovers because it made all those overwashes, those flat, sandy places where the grass hasn't grown back yet. So there's increased habitat since Hurricane Sandy, and that could be part of it. I don't know what the threshold is for their status to change. I don't know if we'll ever approach that in our lifetime, but I'm sure they have a threshold for how many birds they have to see. But it really helps to know by banding them, we can see that they're coming back to the same beaches. Some of the chicks are coming back to the same beach. Sometimes they come back with a different mate. And a really interesting study was done maybe 5 or 6 years ago, where they attached radio transmitters to a few piping plovers. And I believe it was the University of Rhode Island was doing this monitoring. These transponder reading I don't know what you want to call it, antennas are found in a lot of places on Long Island. We have one out by the lighthouse. It detects the transmitters that the birds have. So what they discovered about piping plovers is, if you think about the coastline, how rough it is and how windy it is out over the ocean, and how tiny these birds are, scientists were very surprised to discover that the plovers fly straight across the ocean. They cut off the corner. So they don't, if you imagine flying from Fire Island down to the Gulf Coast of Florida, they don't go overland or follow the coast. They go straight across the ocean down to the Florida coast, which was new information, which is really fun that they're making discoveries, that we can see from 1 year to the next, that they've learned something new. But it may have to do with we have more habitat. We're making really concerted efforts to protect them, with the fencing and we have volunteers, if anybody's interested, who help monitor our plovers. But every hike we have going forward. So if anybody's interested, any hike we have going forward, we will see plovers now. Whether they're starting to nest, whether we're just going to hear them, it's pretty exciting. because they're rare, because they're, oh, here's a good question. How long do they live? I don't know. I need to look it up, but thank you for that.
You mentioned that you see about 40 or 50 pairs on Fire Island. Are we a smaller community for them, or are there larger communities of piping plovers in those other states that you mentioned?
I think the Great Lakes are probably the biggest beaches that are protected with plovers. Fire Island is pretty long. It's 32 miles long. So we do have a pretty large area for them. I don't know how these are all good questions, how the population here, the distribution compares with other states. That I don't know. I think we are lucky that we have this wilderness area where there aren't that many people. We have very little traffic, and they feel safe enough to build nests. Now, of all I don't remember the exact number of nests we had last year. I want to say, I mean, if it was 40, at least 6 or 8 got washed away by tides. But there's a certain a point in the summer up to which they can still re-nest. So if a nest is ruined or predated, I believe in June, they can start over again. But later than that, if we get into July and August, it's too late. It's too late to raise them and get them ready to migrate by the end of August. But those are good questions that I don't know the answers to.
And I know you said that they seem to be solitary, that they didn't hang out all together. But do they play well with other birds their size? Do you see them, or they really are loners?
We do see them with other birds or near other birds, but they sort of hang out near the top of the beach. Most of the sanderlings we see, which are the flocks of 50 or 100 small gray and white birds, not so different from a plover. We see those flocks at the edge of they're always at the edge of the water, and they fly away in a flock. The plovers run from the top of the beach down to the water's edge. So their behaviors are really different. I do know that larger birds will eat their chicks. So as well as gulls, oyster catchers have been known to eat plover chicks. So the bigger birds, they don't play well with the bigger birds, or the bigger birds don't play well with them because of the size differential. And their behavior is different enough to ensure that they're a little bit separate. And the most I've seen together is like 5, but they weren't together in a small group. They were all within my view, let's call it. They weren't, I mean, the pairs stay together, but they sort of run all over the beach. In singles all over the beach. So last year, we had plover nests really close to our visitor center. And so this is kind of fun. It makes it fun for visitors because you don't have to walk 2 miles or all the way down to the beach to be able to see the plovers. The rangers, myself included, are so happy to lend you a pair of binoculars and take you out to the beach so you can try to find these chicks. And as well as the sound, it's just movement. That video, if you were aware of, I don't know if you could see, that there were 2 chicks running back and forth in the grass, really tough to see. But if you just sit yourself still with your binoculars and watch for a little bit of movement, that's how I spot them anyway. Look for a little movement, and then you sort of take out your binoculars and see if you can get a better look.
Are they near Smith Point Beach, or are they more towards?
Mm-hmm. They were, I would say, maybe 30 feet away from our visitor center. When they were choosing nest sites, I don't believe any of them chose to nest quite that close. But I want to say within 300 yards, there was a nest. of our visitor center. And so super easy to go out, and we love to show people the plovers. And part of it is so people understand that sanderlings are not plovers and just how cool they are.
That's really neat. They're very cute. And I do want to go watch for them. But it looks like I have to invest in binoculars to do so.
Well, we go out with binoculars and with a spotting scope, which it looks from a distance, you might think we've got a big camera with a long lens, but it's not. It's a tripod with almost like a telescope. They're probably 18 inches long with an eyepiece. So binoculars is 2 eyes. This is 1 eye. And we're able to watch them, with a really good zoom. So we get a good look. And this is how our researchers read those leg bands. Right.
Okay.
So.
Well, that's great. I know I monopolized all the conversation there, but does anyone else have any questions for Pat about the plovers or any other life on the beach?
Have they been seen on Bellport Bay? We don't usually see them on the bay side. It's usually on the sandy ocean beach on the Atlantic side. That was a good question. Doesn't mean they're not there. Get your binoculars out and go hang out and report back to us what you see. If you're interested, if anybody's interested, what I'm going to do is type, I think everyone can see this. So this is the general information email we have at the park. And if you are interested in being a volunteer plover spotter, or if you just want to find out about programs where we might be going out to look for plovers, email. I get these emails, and I'd love to set you up to come out for a program, or just go out with our volunteers and researchers to go and look at the birds, because it's really more fun to go with somebody who does it every day, because they know where the nests are. They know where the, how many chicks are by each nest. They kind of have a rough idea of where to look to get you started, but they're fun to watch.
Well, thank you very much, Pat. If anyone else has any questions, feel free to put it into the chat. But at this point, I'd like to talk about our upcoming programs that we're going to have with Fire Island National Seashore folks. So our next program will be next month, Wednesday, April 13th, and we'll be exploring Fire Island's sunken forest. It's a very, very unique place to visit. So I hope you join us back for that one. And then for future programming in May, we're also going to explore Fire Island's lighthouse. And we'll do that virtually again, and that will be in our newsletter. And to register for any of these programs, please visit our library's website at communitylibrary.org or give us a call at 631-399-1511, extension 240. And to learn more about Fire Island National Seashore, you can visit their website at www.nps.gov/FIIS. And yes, that's 2 I's.
I'll type that in.
Okay, very good. And if you wanted to email them with any questions or to get onto any of their tours that they do that Pat was mentioning, that email address is FIIS_information@nps.gov, G-O-V.
Put those in the chat. If people can look at the chat, if you go to the chat bubble, you can see those.
Very good. Very good. Well, again, thank you so much, Pat, for another very interesting presentation. Love these presentations. So glad you can join us. And thank you everyone for attending.
And I hope to see everybody out at the beach.
Very good. Thank you. Have a
Bye-bye
good night.
now.
Bye.
Bye-bye.